Great Bruce politics and how did we get here and how do we move forward. So as we gather today to listen to each other and discuss ways to move forward on the climate emergency, it is important that we begin by recognizing that wherever we are in Grey and Bruce counties, we are gathered on the territory of indigenous peoples, and we acknowledge the history, spirituality, culture, and stewardship of the land by the indigenous people. In Grey and Bruce, this is the territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, the people of the Three Fires, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Ojibwe, who gathered and governed here since time immemorial and who are represented today by the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, consisting of communities of Saugeen First Nation and the Chippewas of Nawash unceded First Nation at Neasheenigimeim. We also recognize these as the lands of the Métis Nation of Ontario. By gathering on these lands, we are all treaty people with all the relations and responsibilities that entails. So hi everybody, it's great that you are here. And so far we are almost 40 people on this call, which is great. So my name is Joachim Ostertag and you know Lee Greg. So tonight we want to explore how councils and citizens groups in Grey and Bruce counties develop and adopt various forms of climate actions, small and big. And we also want to have, and it's really important, a solution-focused discussion and explore complete political and municipal ways to move forward. So we will hear from a panel of 6 community leaders about their perspectives and experiences in municipal and county politics. And we'll have a discussion with everybody. So, oh yeah, and as Lee has said already, when you don't speak, the best thing is you turn your microphone on mute. That's usually on the left side, which helps for an easier flow. So our presenters today are Cathy Coburn, Odette Bartnicki, John Anderson, Joyce Hall, Geoffrey Shea, and Kim Wingrove. Cathy is a counselor with the Municipality of Georgian Bluffs, a former public health nurse, mental health and addiction nurse, and a nursing professor. She has lived in Grey County for her entire life, except during university years. She grew up on a potato and beef family farm in Bajeros. And she says, you have not really lived if you have never picked potatoes. That's why we picked her as the first speaker, because of that line. I like it. So as a counselor, she's interested in policy development that has a positive impact on the health and well-being of our residents, including climate change initiatives, engaging with residents and learning more about their needs and recommendations for our township. Okay, Cathy, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, you're welcome. And thank you folks for having me here tonight. I would like to be able to claim that my journey to climate action and climate change initiatives has been a long and illustrious one, but that's not the case. It's been rather short and probably fairly practical. It is true that I grew up on a potato farm in, I'm going to correct your pronunciation of Bajeros, you're welcome. However, it sounds far more exotic the way you say that. In 2019, I attended a climate change rally in the city of Owen Sound in front of City Hall. And I went as a member of the public at large to become inspired and to learn a little more about climate change. And while I was there, I had the opportunity to be approached by one of the grassroots climate change community leaders who introduced herself, learned that I was a municipal politician, and encouraged me to become involved at the municipal level. And so I would describe that as one of the catalysts in terms of me moving this agenda forward. And I thank that individual for being brave and approaching me in that way. Following that, I decided I needed to learn quite a little bit more about climate change. And so I was connected with some of the climate action teams locally, and in particular, the one housed within Georgian Bluffs, which is where I sit on municipal council. And I was invited to attend one of those meetings along with our deputy mayor, who I see here tonight, Deputy Mayor Sue Carlton. And we attended one of those meetings. I think it's fair to say we were both extremely impressed at how organized that community grassroots group was and how it was growing in leaps and bounds. It seemed with every subsequent meeting, their numbers were doubling. And that was impressive and encouraging, and also a catalyst for me to try to move this agenda forward at the municipal council level. So from there, I did a lot of reading. I participated in the FCM Municipal Climate Leaders Forum. It was a course that lasted several months, and I did learn quite a bit about not so much maybe the science of climate change, but how to move that agenda forward at a municipal level, and that was really, really helpful. From there, we had some fortuitous timing, I think, with some staffing changes at the municipality. We had a new CAO join our team, an individual promoted to clerk, and a senior planner, all who were keen and interested as well in climate change. And so having those connections within your staff really made a big difference and made it far easier for me to move that agenda forward. So between Sue and I, we took this notion back to council, and we were quite well supported in declaring this to be a priority for our municipality. And from there, it was, we moved very quickly into developing a climate action committee, which was formalized as a committee of council. We have 5 amazing community members on that committee. They're not just there to attend meetings. They do a lot of work. They roll their sleeves up and they get stuff done. They were quick to develop a work plan for our committee, and that's a committee which the deputy mayor and I both sit on as well. And so that's where we are today at our council with our climate change activities. We have made some recommendations as a committee to council to include this in our budget, which will be approved next month, hopefully. And from there, we intend to engage in membership with BARC and the PCP program with FCM, and that will help guide our action plan moving forward. So fingers crossed that budget allotment for climate change will be approved next month. We are well established as a committee and council seems to be on board. So that's where we are right now. I will continue to do my part to help council move forward with this particular portfolio, and that's the extent of my journey so far. I'm happy to answer any questions after all of our introductions. So thank you once again for inviting me.
Well, thanks very much, Cathy. Does anybody have any questions right now? It sounds like you have had a rather steep learning curve in 1.5 years. It's fantastic, and with lots of interesting stuff happening on council.
Yeah, it sounds like you're doing great learning. You took an awesome course that will give recommendations on how to make action happen at the municipal level. Are there any initial first recommendations you're making to council as part of the budget items? So that's question 1, what actual actions, and would the question 2 is, do you categorize them as climate action or mitigation, that sort of stuff? Thank you.
Yeah, those are great questions. The first one, the answer is yes. We have specific recommendations from our committee to council, and that being paying for and joining the memberships that I spoke of earlier, the BARC, which is through ICLEI, and the FCM program partners in climate protection. So that's an initial recommendation that helps set us on a particular course in following the steps in those programs. I do believe we will have a budget for some kind of staff member, hopefully dedicated to climate action work, and whether that will be part-time, seasonal, or not seasonal, but rather contract. We don't know what that looks like at this point because we still haven't finalized our budget. So those are our specific recommendations for now. And that is by way of finding a consultant that will help prepare our climate action plan for us. And our staff has been good to reach out to neighboring lower tier municipalities to see if we can work together to find some efficiencies. And also, of course, connecting with the upper tier in that kind of planning as well.
So just briefly to pick up James' other question, it was about, I think, the relation between climate action and climate mitigation and climate adaptation.
Right. Yes. So I mean, I hope both of those areas will be covered. It's kind of easy to focus on the low-hanging fruit sometimes, but it needs to be part of a bigger plan. And I would hope that whatever climate action plan is developed for our municipality will definitely include both adaptation and mitigation.
Yeah, let's do three written questions because there's lots of questions coming in on the chat. Cathy, was there any hesitation for council to include a community member on the task force?
I don't think so. I think we were so darned happy to have folks to share the workload with us that, and these 5 community individuals are so knowledgeable about climate change, and they've been at that gig for a lot longer than most of us have. So no, I don't think there was any hesitancy around that at all. It's a great group, and we're really lucky to have them.
Thank you. That question was from Laura, and Glenn just wants to know, as our final question, Cathy, is there a written agenda for your community climate action that can be looked at by the public?
Written agenda. So I wonder if they mean the work plan, our committee work plan maybe. And yes, it is written and it is included and updated regularly. Luke, and I see Luke here is Zandvliet, is the keeper of the work plan and the updater of the work plan on our committee. And it is attached to our minutes that go online at our website on a regular basis. And I see Sue is concurring with me, so I'm glad I answered that question correctly. There hasn't been any hesitation to have public members. We're all about engaging the public at Georgian Bluffs, and as I say, we're happy to have them.
Okay, let's move on. So the next presenter is Odette Bartnicki, who I am on all kinds of committees together. She had a career as a teacher, consultant, principal, and superintendent positions with the Ministry of Education and on different school boards. She was the deputy mayor of the town of Blue Mountains in 2018. And by 2019, the town of Blue Mountain council had unanimously declared a climate change emergency and set targets of the reduction and elimination of single-use plastics by 2021. And both motions were brought forward by Odette. So Odette is now retired and is a great champion of environmental causes, the protection of parks and waterfront for public access. And she lives now on the Saugeen shores. She is committed to raising awareness and creating real change to address climate change with climate action groups across Grey Blues. I must say, I really enjoy working with Odette. So Odette, it's your turn. Thanks very much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. And as I look at the screen of the 45 participants, I see many names of people that I have worked with or that I know, and I'm really happy that you're all here. I'm not so sure a year ago at this time we would have had this big an audience for this type of chat. But despite all of the COVID restrictions we're all living under, climate change has still managed to keep in the news, at the head of the news, and of course, again today with some of the political plans that were put forward, big news. So Joachim mentioned my career, and I have to tell you, back when I started teaching in a tiny little school in Erin, Ontario, teachers had to buy their own decorations or posters or whatever they put in the classroom back then with their pocket money. And I didn't have any. So I literally had one item to hang up in that classroom, and it was a pennant, a felt pennant with Charlie Brown on it, and Lucy and Snoopy, and they were digging a hole in the ground to plant the famous stick tree. And on the tree, it said, "The planting of a tree shows hope for the future." And I really believed that back then as a young teacher. Today, I and my husband in lockdown in our backyard planted 35 trees. So I'm a little tired tonight, but I still believe in the planting of trees, in the action. I will say that in the local engagement picture, I'm just so pleased about the spread of climate action teams across Grey Bruce. They do exist in other little places in Ontario, in parts, in different names. But here, most of you will have seen the film Resilience. About a year and a half ago was the first screening at the Roxy in Owen Sound. And from there, it just sort of spread out. And the film, John Anderson is on the line and will speak later, and Liz Zetlin, I'm not sure if she's on here. I think they made it personal to Grey Bruce because the speakers in the film and the images that we saw were Grey Bruce specific. And I think that connected. Climate change isn't as big a topic in rural areas as it is in cities around the world. We think we have all this beautiful open farmland and forest and waterfronts on Georgian Bay and Huron here, and we kind of take that for granted. But I started watching a half a dozen years ago, development coming in, forests being taken down. Not all that is bad. I'm not saying it's bad, but the impact of growth on environment and climate change needs to be understood in a rural context. In fact, all of the climate change calculators that you can find on the internet all over the world don't really take in the urban, the rural kind of a setting. For example, it's fine to say, let's ditch our cars and take public transportation. For most of us, that's just not possible in a rural area, but we can do other things. So the cats basically developed, and some of them have slightly different names, but climate action teams or environmental advocacy teams, whatever, they started to form following the film. And one of the great strategies that Liz and John and Marilyn and others used was when they agreed to screen the film, they had the supporters or hosts agree to host a meeting 1 week later. And we all know that you can get all fired up by a speaker or a film or something else. And if you don't get right on it, you lose people, you lose momentum. So that was one of the things I noticed in the ones that I was involved in, is that passion and that drive was still present a week later. And some of those teams got to work within 2 weeks and started. Some of them have done phenomenal things. They now exist. John, I'm going to get the number wrong, but I think I counted 9 of them today. Am I close in there? Okay, 9 that are spreading. And I'll just share mine because I started out with Collingwood Connection. It's a great group. It's Simcoe County. And yet I'm going to say the leader of that group with all the passion to grow it lives on the Grey County border. So she's actually a Town of Blue Mountain person, but everybody else in that club, and it's huge, are Simcoe people. And it is starting to spread to the east. They've done some fabulous things, and most recent thing is that with the help of the Grey Bruce support letter, they were able to get a great grant to work on a carbon calculator for a rural context, which is going to be great. I mean, we looked at the UK, we looked at other countries for this kind of thing, and it just didn't exist. So they're just moving ahead. How many of you read the 52 weeks, the weekly bulletin from that group? 2 of the members. They're just starting year 2. So we're on really week 53. But those kinds of initiatives are raising awareness and educating literally dozens and dozens and dozens of people with different talents. Town of Blue Mountains, right after the film, a church group hosted, and right after the film, a really great group formed. They were able to bring people on. And while I was still on council there, I would say that group actually brought a proposal to council that had to do with how waste was managed. They actually did the research on styrofoam because, of course, that's an area with huge development. And there's a lot of styrofoam on development sites. It's used for insulation, and it's in packaging with furnaces and air conditioners and everything else. So they realized that the landfill there had a lot of this stuff in it, and they did a lot of research, and they came back to council, and based on their research, which was far more than we could have ever expected from town staff to do, they were able to sort of say, we need to move ahead with this. And I think we're seeing that in some of the other groups too. From there, I guess I've had the connection to the Grey Bruce groups for the last, it seems like forever, but I think it's only 3 years. And now I'm in Saugeen. So I noticed about 1.5 years ago that even though we call ourselves Grey Bruce, the Bruce groups were rather quiet. And I'm not. And so I decided that I would try to do something here, and I joined the CFUW group, so Women's University Women's Group, which exists across the country and around the world. And it's a big group here in Southampton and Saugeen. So they chose this year to have the environment as one of their 2 initiatives. And this is a group of people with more expertise between them than I've seen at a whole school board or IBM or Bruce Power, you name it. They've got talents beyond what we would know. So they're moving ahead, and last night they approved a resolution that is around plastics, near and dear to my heart. It's something that I did bring, as Joachim mentioned, at the Town of Blue Mountains to be implemented by last July 1st. It got partially implemented, but COVID put a lot of this stuff on hold as well. So we did that along with Nepean near Ottawa. And this resolution now will go across Canada to all of these groups and hopefully be approved at the national level. And then it becomes a powerful tool to influence candidates of all parties. We try to be nonpartisan in this kind of stuff. Here, my job here, I started to recognize about 1.5 years ago that there was a lot of good stuff happening here, but that one arm didn't know what the other was doing. So for instance, I spoke 2 weeks ago to a wonderful lady who has been heading up the Southport Horticultural Society, and they've done 17 bee pods on the beach. They've done tremendous work beyond what I've seen elsewhere. And she did not know a thing about Saugeen for the environment, which is a group that plants major trees with Bruce Power and homeowners. We've got 3 coming shortly every year for 11 years. And she said, well, how do you know that? You've only been here for a couple of years. I've been here for 20 and I didn't know it. So my job is to research all those groups. I've got 11 now. They are answering a questionnaire and we're going to introduce them to each other because I really feel that there is strength in numbers and in common causes. And all of them are linked to climate change. They might not call their work climate change initiative, but each one of them is making a difference. And I want to just end by this. I know from the work I've done in education and this work and my friends and family, my family's huge. It's been too long without them, but the work in climate change is a little bit scary for a lot of people. A lot of people will acknowledge that it's real, but they are overwhelmed by the scope of it. They think that their little piece of the puzzle, the little things they do in their personal life are not going to overcome, mitigate, or adapt to climate change. And it's quite distressing. There are at least 5 members of this group that went with Joachim and myself and others, and we took the Climate Conversations course about 1.5 years ago. It was all about the emotional impact of climate change on individuals and how we could talk about it in a way that empowered people and engaged people and didn't frighten them off. So we all know, everybody on this call is the converted. We know that half of getting to those goals of 2020 and 2050 is big picture. It's government, it's big business, it's that big picture. The other half is individual. We as Canadians know that our carbon footprints are among the highest in the entire world, averaging around 15 tons of carbon per year, when we should be in the neighborhood of 7 if we are ever going to reach those goals. But when I say that to people, and then we talk about canceling a flight or canceling, what's another one? Eating a vegan diet, all these things are great ideas, but that kind of stops people. And I use those 2 examples because they were tough for me. I thought finally in this retirement phase of life, I would travel. And then somebody told me about the carbon footprint of a jet plane. And I started to feel guilty about travel. I now know I will still travel. I will do it half as often, and I will stay wherever I go twice as long. And I will watch how my tourism impacts the country that I visit. Food, I'm not a vegan. I like my meat and potatoes and things like that. But my husband and I found it very easy to say, okay, we're going to have chicken and fish at least once a week. We're going to have pasta and a vegetarian dish. And guess what? You're left with 3 meals that are meat meals, and we don't even do that anymore. So those kinds of things, I think that we need to tell people, don't think you have to do it in this super way, because people will just turn off and walk away. And finally, I don't know if Lee's got my little graphic to put up, but my favorite quote of all time, apart from the Charlie Brown tree one, is from Margaret Mead. She said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And we have to believe that we can make a difference." We do. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Odette. That was a wide spectrum that you covered there. And obviously you were an educator in your former and present life. Yeah, we decided that we do questions on chat, which makes it easier to move forward.
Sure.
Does anybody have any questions right now for Odette that you could put on the chat? And in these things, I depend quite a bit on Lee as well to get this organized.
There was one comment in the chat. There was a comment from Christina saying that the Climate Action Network in Blue Mountains, so what it was working on the styrofoam issue, trying to get a drop-off for recycling styrofoam. And Christine would love to know how other groups are handling this. Maybe Odette, can you give us an idea if there's anything happening in Saugeen Shores for that?
In Saugeen Shores, we have a fellow who, his name is Dean, I can't tell you his last name, comes up from Listowel, I believe, with a compactor in tow. He's a young fellow who has bought this compactor, and he visits 7 municipalities now. And we store all that stuff in a big trailer. We just go to an open landfill site and we throw the hard styrofoam, not all styrofoam, into this trailer. He comes on a regular basis and compacts it into 40-pound bricks right there. I don't know how many municipalities one person can take on, but I can tell you, he spent, because he told us, he spent $150,000 buying the compactor. Saugeen Shores pays $6,000 for the entire year for him to come and get it. So it's being very successful. I know right now Meaford and Town of Blue Mountains have already spoken to Dean, but he wasn't too sure how many he could take on and keep it up. We also have film plastic recycling here, which I know is rare, and it's a pilot that we are into the 2nd year right now. We sell the film plastic to a company that makes the plastic furniture that goes outside, outdoor furniture, and Eco-Roster. Eco-Roster is a paving system. It's a grid of plastic that you put into the dirt, and then you fill it with either gravel or little concrete blocks or whatever. So we've got some pilots in the group that I'm talking about right now going on our rail trail with that. So finding recycling reusers is one of our greatest challenges. It's so expensive to use recycled plastics that most companies will use virgin material, which is fossil fuels, going into it. I hope that answers that.
Yes, which shows the paradoxes of our culture and the problems with recycling. There was just one other question, which is actually a really central question to what you talked about. We don't have a lot of time, but maybe you can say just briefly, how did you go about finding all the disparate groups, not desperate, disparate, whatever, groups in your region?
I'm very nosy. So,
okay, that's a good answer.
I'm on, when you move to a new place, you go on every different website going. And so my first spring, for instance, I saw a notice that said homeowners could have these trees, rather large trees. They're too large for an individual to plant. You could buy 2 for $100 each. Well, I had just bought 1, which was much smaller, from the same place for $345. So I looked at that and looked into it, and it turned out that it's a partnership between Bruce Power, the town of Saugeen Shores, and Everest Nursery. And they've been doing it for 11 years. You get some choice, not a big choice, but they are really big trees. The ones I planted today are really little trees. But yeah, you just keep searching and looking for people, and some are very common. Every municipality seems to have a horticulture society. Some are more active than others. So you kind of look for those things. There's also a wonderful member of council here. They just approved on Monday night environmental advocacy committee. So that's come about in a very short time. And that wonderful counselor has lived her all her life and has been most helpful at naming people that I could connect to. So it just was something you just sat down and did for like a job. I look at it like a job and put a day or two a week into it.
Well, thanks so much. And you have an admirer, James Mitchell, who says you are a connector, a communicator, a role model, and change maker. I think that sums it kind of up. Thanks, James. Okay. Well, thanks so much, Odette. Let's move on. And you already did some introduction to John Anderson. If you were in a space together, we would just look around the circle and I would ask who knows John Anderson, who doesn't know John Anderson. But anyway, some of you might not know that John Anderson researched marine fisheries ecology in the North Atlantic Ocean. He worked for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, St. John's, Newfoundland, and was an adjunct professor in the Department of Ocean Sciences. And he has this endless biography. Right now, he serves as a scientific advisor on climate change issues to several groups, and he's on all kinds of climate action teams. He also works together with Cathy Coburn in what she had mentioned earlier. And he also says he's just an ordinary guy, and he bicycles, and there's a lot of hot air when he bicycles up the hills. And he was the co-author of the movie Resilience, which is kind of the reason why we are all together here right now. So please welcome John Anderson.
Well, thanks so much, Joachim. And it's great to see so many people here tonight and engaging this gathering series that you and Lee run. I think it's great. Well, I got to change the tone just a little bit and approach this as the scientist that I am and tell you that, like, I still find one of the most fascinating questions for scientists is the disconnect that exists between what scientists believe about climate change compared to what society believes. Addressing this question began more than a decade ago, back in 2008, when scientists at Yale University began their research process to try and understand this disconnect. Studies have demonstrated that 97% of the scientific community understands our climate is changing due to human activities, that these changes are significant, and the negative impacts on Earth's support systems pose an existential threat to society and ultimately to our human survival. It's a big deal, at least to scientists. For the public, the belief in human-caused climate change currently sits around 60%. And this is tracked up steadily from a low of 48% about 8 years ago. So people's opinions are slowly changing over time, but there's still a big disconnect between scientists and society at large. Well, there are many reasons for this disconnect, but one of the biggest reasons is the powerful effect that the professional denial industry has had on people's beliefs and understanding. A second big reason for the disconnect is that people's opinions and beliefs on climate change are determined mostly by their political affiliation. If you lean to the left, vote for progressives and liberal candidates, you're much more likely to accept the science of climate change. But if you lean to the right and vote for conservatives, you're much less likely to accept the science. Politics and politicians are a big deal when it comes to climate action, and they have a very profound effect on what people believe. Going back to the denial industry, the literature on this is huge and it's still growing. One of the first great books exposing this fossil fuel funded denial campaign was published in 2010 by renowned science historian Naomi Oreskes of Harvard University and her co-author Eric Conway, titled The Merchants of Doubt. The most recent book on this subject was just published this previous January by renowned climate scientist Michael Mann, titled The New Climate War. And there's a host of books and research articles and now increasingly legal actions that are in between, sandwiched in between these two. The denial campaign has been going on for decades. It began at least back in the 1980s, and it has been very effective. When I teach at the Georgian College, I typically spend 1/3 of my time on climate denialism and the huge effect it's had on people's understanding of climate science, the risks climate change poses, and society's ability to act on reducing these impacts. Denialism goes through different stages, and so too has the fossil fuel funded climate denial campaign. The most recent iteration of the denial industry, some call it the fourth phase, but it's to put the blame on the individuals. You are the problem. It's not us, it's you. And that's where this denial campaign is currently focusing. So many people are starting to feel guilty about this. And this is some of the anxiety that people are feeling. But this is all run by a multi-million-dollar campaign to make you feel that way. Many people just don't know that. In reality, the problem is not you so much as it's the system that we live in. And I just challenge anyone, try reducing your carbon footprint and see how far you get. For most of us, you might be able to reduce it 25, 30% without undergoing a very transformative change in your lifestyle. And it's not that a transformative change in lifestyle is not possible or that it's not desirable. It's just not possible for most of us when you try and go it alone. So I think this is one of the things that we need to talk about, which is system change. People's political voting preference is the largest single reason explaining differences in belief on climate change. A recent Angus Reid poll demonstrated that about 83% of Liberal and NDP voters accepted that climate change is mostly caused by humans, compared to 35% of Conservative voters. That's a big divide. And you might recall the recent Conservative Party of Canada's convention when 54% of delegates voted against a resolution declaring that climate change was real and the party was willing to do something about it. And unfortunately, in recent years, the subject of climate change has become politicized, and this has caused a further entrenchment of people's beliefs. Knowing that we live here in Bruce Grey Owen Sound, primarily a conservative-leaning area, then it can help us to understand why we are lagging behind pretty much the rest of Ontario in taking climate action at the municipal level. To make sincere and meaningful progress on climate action, we are going to need political leadership. And I think this is a second area we need to think about and talk about tonight, which is political leadership. But there's one more topic I want to discuss, and that's at the personal level that we all deal with when it comes to climate change. In our film Resilience, Transforming Our Community, released almost 2 years ago on Earth Day in 2019, I said that people need to understand at least 3 things before they will consider changing their behavior and beginning to act on something like climate change. I called it the 3 questions. And just to remind you, those were, what's the problem? How will it affect me? And what can I do about it? Well, first, people need to know what the problem is. Well, that problem is climate change and the fact that we are causing it. The greenhouse gases we emit here in Bruce and Grey counties travel around the world and will stay in the atmosphere for at least 100 to 200 years and maybe longer. And these greenhouse gases are fundamentally changing our climate and will continue to do so for a long time to come. Decades at the very best, centuries at the worst. When researchers from Yale University polled people in the federal riding of Bruce Grey Owen Sound, they found that 80% of us believe the Earth is getting warmer, but only 55% agreed it was because of humans. So the observation suggests our biggest challenge is climate literacy, understanding the problem. So I asked, how can we become more climate literate? Once you understand the problem, you can move on to the second question, which is, well, how is this going to affect me? And the answer is climate change is already affecting you. In the best case, you're simply paying more for your property insurance. In the worst case, you've had your basement flooded by the 1 in 100 year storm, or maybe your house or cottage burned down by a wildfire. And you now have unrecoverable financial losses, not to mention the mental anguish that will probably never leave you. And that's just what's happening now. The real impacts are going to hit our children and our grandchildren in the years and decades to come. That's the tragedy of this situation. When Yale scientists asked residents here again in Bruce Grey Owen Sound, the federal riding, if they thought our province has been impacted already by climate change, 66% yes. Yet when they asked these same people if they thought climate change would ever impact them, the numbers dropped to 41%. So the second challenge here is that people just do not believe climate change is going to affect them personally, even if they understand the problem. So again, this points to how can we become more climate literate? Well, as a scientist, this research helps me understand why we're having so much trouble here getting to question 3, what can we do about it? And why the uptake at the municipal level has been so slow here in Bruce and Grey counties. So that's it for me. Thanks very much. Back to you, Joachim.
Thanks very much, John. You answered almost all the questions already. Does anybody have any more questions?
How do you think that we can, like George has recommendations, but what are your recommendations for increasing, as you say, climate literacy, or George would more say bringing out those values that allow for people to be interested in having climate literacy? I'd also be interested to hear Cathy's thoughts on this, whether sounds like she's had uptake, it has landed some with people on council at Georgian Bluffs or her constituents.
Sure, just a brief response to James. The great science communicators say the number one thing we can do is to just talk about climate change and just to normalize this in our discussions. If you're as old as I am, you would know that when I was young like you, like we didn't really talk about sex and things like that a lot at social gatherings, and now we talk about all sorts of issues that just were off the table years ago because we've normalized that concept of different sexual orientations and different rights and so on. And you know, it's just an example of we need to normalize this, and it's become so politicized. We need to talk about it. And they also say that in talking about it, you don't begin with climate change. You begin by finding shared values. And most of us love this area we live in. We love the environment. We're proud of it. We're proud of our communities. Maybe some of us have raised children here. I didn't, but some of us have, and we're proud of that. And so finding those common values and then going forward, you'll find you don't really even have to talk about climate change. You just have to talk about these impacts that are here now and are coming down the pipe, and then proceed that way. So those are 2 of the most important mechanisms: is talk about it and start by finding your set of shared values.
Cathy, did you want to comment, Cathy?
Thank you. I would say just quickly that I think the whole concept needs to be demystified to a certain extent here. And I think it evokes a lot of feelings of fear, and it makes people feel threatened. Their livelihood feels threatened, or their way of life feels threatened. So I actually had an hour-long conversation about this with John on the telephone this morning. And I said, what I really need to know are some practical solutions that resonate with our locals, that make them feel reassured and don't add to the threat and the fear that they're already experiencing. So I would just say those are some ways that we can communicate a little better too when it comes to climate change.
That's true. Once we talk about stuff, it becomes less scary. But there are a lot more issues when it comes to climate denial. It's big. And yeah, there's a big industry behind it too. There are some other questions in the chat. One of them is, in your opinion, John, can Doug Ford's conservative policies be reversed after he may leave office? It seems during this year of COVID, he has lifted many environmental protections. What do you think, John?
Yeah, absolutely. It can be reversed. The fact that we've lost more time is probably the biggest thing we should be thinking about. But look at what's happening down in the States right now. The Biden administration has come in, and they're no longer really trying to work with the Republicans. They are bringing in a big and aggressive agenda. And I think when we move past Doug Ford and his conservatives, you know, who actually uninstalled electrical vehicle charging stations and dismantled windmills, we need to not do the incremental changes. We need to do the big and bold changes, because some of you may recall that back in 2018, when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change produced their report about the 1.5 target, the temperature target, they said we had 12 years left. to 2030 to get our emissions down. And the numbers vary, but it's at least on the order of 50 to 60% from the emissions we've been giving. Well, that was 2018, 2019, 2020, it's now 2021. We're looking at election 2022. At the minimum, we've lost 4 of those 12 years. So yes, we can absolutely do them, but we're going to have to be big and we're going to have to be bold.
Thanks, John. The third question is Sybil. As a researcher of oceans, she wonders how much you agree with the new film about the huge impact the fishing industry has to climate change.
Oh man, I'm still pretty plugged into that environment, and I'll tell you, it's just raging. That film Seaspiracy really pushed a few buttons, but it's gotten a big response. On the high seas, I think the problem is that we're not regulating the oceans beyond our 200-mile limit. Inside that 200-mile limit, we're largely doing a good job, at least in the developed countries. In the developing countries, they have huge issues of large trawlers from corporations from Japan and the States and Norway coming into their territorial waters and fishing. So that's got to be addressed. But the big issue is out on the high seas, and the overfishing there is, that's piracy, it is. But it's sure generated a lot of chatter in the science world, and I've been following that. But I think the film is good for provoking people to think about these things, and it's far from over. Like it will continue. But some of the criticisms of the film don't have merit, but some of them absolutely do.
Thanks very much, John, to Joyce Hall, who is also super active on all kinds of climate action teams in Grey Bruce. So Joyce Hall's political engagement started in tenant advocacy in around 1986, when under Liberal government led by David Peterson, her rent tripled. Years later, she heard Fair Vote Canada founder Larry Gordon on CBC Radio. She worked for electoral reform for 15 years, and many people know Joyce Hall from that work through several provincial referenda. In 2019, she attended a meeting on climate change at a church in Flesherton, facilitated by John Butler, who we all know. Having decided that climate change could not wait for electoral reform, she decided to taper off activity with Fair Vote Canada and became involved with the Grey Highlands Climate Action Group. She is also a member of Just Earth, founded by former NDP MP Lynn MacDonald. And right now, they are speaking with MPs to promote improvements in Bill C-12, which is Canada's Climate Accountability Act. So Joyce Hall is actually a good example of what Odette talked about earlier about connecting in the community. Okay, Joyce Hall, thanks very much for coming here, and take it away.
Thank you. I want to thank you for this event. This is really just wonderful to hear these this mixture of counselors and activists and John Anderson. And when I heard the topic was working with politicians, I was really looking forward to hearing those experiences. And I really thought about maybe not being a speaker, but just listening. Working at the municipal level is new for me. And so that's where I really need to do, the learning curve is very steep on that, as well as, of course, on climate change. By the way, I did a training today using the MIT climate model, and discovered that Canada, in a list of greenhouse gas emitting countries, is 58 out of 61. I couldn't believe that. Like, we're really, really bad. So, and I guess having worked at the municipal and federal level on electoral reform, and you know, I thought maybe the municipal level is the place where you can get something done. You can make some progress. I'd say in terms of our Grey Highlands Climate Action Group, we're really looking for models and strategies for how to engage with councillors. And so this working with the municipal level is something that you know, I'm working on, and I think the whole group is working on. We're finding really our feet in our relationship with the council and the staff at Grey Highlands. Originally, 2 members of council attended our climate action group meetings, but they stopped after COVID. And forging new relationships under COVID has not been easy, given the restrictions. You know, you don't have water cooler conversations, or, you know, invite people out for coffee or attend a meeting in person of council and then chat afterwards. So, you know, starting fresh with people is, I think, a little bit tough. Staff and counselors are busy. They're really super busy. When you call, it's like, you know, they could fit you in for a 15-minute call in 2 days, you know, that sort of thing. So it can be really hard to make a contact. Fortunately, we now have a counselor who has agreed to be our link to council. And so we can use her to guide us to the right person when we have questions. A case in point in terms of working with council and wanting to get clarification and not knowing how to go about it and quite what kind of action to take is an issue that we've been concerned about, which is the dispensation of 2 pieces of municipally owned land in the Beaver Valley. Grey Highlands owns 2 pieces of land, one at the top, one at the bottom, near Talisman. We knew that planning for those properties was in the works. So in February, we put together a list of guidelines for any development that we would want to see there, and we sent it to council. I realize now that doing a deputation is more effective. Sending an email or a letter doesn't really get you anywhere. In any case, we learned last week of a set of 2 public visioning sessions on the Beaver Valley corridor, the first to take place on April 28th. So we plan to be present at that. A particular point we want to make, though, about the Beaver Valley concerns the fact that municipally owned land in March became part of a joint venture agreement to be packaged with the Talisman lands and marketed for development. So the Climate Action Group wants to see the municipally owned land remain in the hands of the public or a nonprofit corporation. And so we want, you know, to get that through to council. I give those details because this issue has had us on a different course from council, and I wonder if other groups have found themselves in a similar situation where something that has happened at council has caused a lot of concern. We're really concerned about publicly owned land being packaged for development with privately owned land. Another item where we will, though, be entirely supporting council is that Grey Highlands joined the PCP in December. And at our last meeting, members of the Climate Action Group expressed a desire for an update. So I phoned the CAO yesterday, and I was told to email her with my requests for information, which I will do. I'm just wondering what has happened since December and now, and whether we can help. I'm hoping that my interest will be welcome. I have to say that the overall feeling I have in my contact with council is that I'm bothering busy people with questions, or maybe even offering ideas when they're not asked for, which is something I try to avoid in my personal life. And I don't like to do it in my volunteer life either. The opportunities for input seem to be limited. I spoke, for example, at Open Forum in order to communicate with council about this concern about this visioning process for the Beaver Valley. An open forum is an opportunity for members of the public to speak for 3 minutes at the beginning of a council meeting on any agenda item. And it's a very good practice, but there's no feedback or dialogue. So you say your piece and then, you know, it's more or less over. Oh, I was asked a question. So I'd say we are looking for constructive ways to engage with council. I watched a recording of a presentation you did, Lee, to the council in Georgian Bluffs, right? I think it was Georgian Bluffs, regarding their climate planning process. And it was wonderful. It really gave me a tone and a direction. You offered volunteer help. You requested that certain groups be consulted. You encouraged the process. And I thought, oh, that was really nice. And you did it as a deputation, which really works because you have more time. So it struck me today after emailing back and forth with John Anderson that I suggest to the Climate Action Group that we do a canvas possibly of expertise in Grey Highlands that could possibly save money in the PCP process if local expertise is available. And we do have a lot in Grey Highlands. We have people who are professors at Guelph University, who are marine aquatic biologists, or I don't know, we have lots of expertise anyway. My hope for the PCP is that because it sets emission reductions targets, I think that's really step 3 or something in the milestones. A climate change lens will be introduced into decision making automatically, so that every decision will have that climate lens there. So I happen to notice, for example, that when Owen Sound, the Owen Sound staff made their reported to council on whether or not it would be advisable or possible to do composting. I read the 5-page report, and it was all money. You know, of course, it's all money. You know, it would cost us, that. We'd have to raise the fees this much. We'd have to raise the taxes that much. And let's put it, we're not going to do anything for another couple of years or whatever it was. But, you know, what's the problem is, and I'm sure John Anderson will agree, what doesn't get counted is the methane in that particular case. Okay. I mean, until you count something, and it can't be part of the decision-making process. So I think this PCP process, which it kind of forces councils, municipalities to start counting, okay, what every decision is going to cost them in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. I'm really hoping that that will kind of be a driver for the kind of action that we really want to see at the municipality.
Well, thanks very much, Joyce. The next speaker is Geoffrey Shea. Geoffrey was elected to West Grey Council in 2018. He is on the Accessibility and Sustainability Committees, the Neustadt Recreation Board, and the Police Services Board. He also serves on the Provincial AMO Waste Management Task Force. So, Geoffrey, want to take it away?
Yes, thank you, Joachim.
Thanks for being here.
And thank you for Lee as well, and John for inviting me. This is really educational for me. And I really enjoyed the topic that you chose, something climate and politics, or I think those two words were somehow in the topic. So I guess I'm sort of newly elected. I was on council once before years ago, but it was a very different time, and it was very hard to make any inroads or have a whole lot of effect. I think things are very different now. When I ran for council a couple of years ago, this time around, I did it because I wanted to increase the level of civic engagement in local politics. I wanted to, I saw a deteriorating caliber of public conversation happening culturally and socially generally. And I wanted to do my little bit in my little corner of the world to try and raise the caliber of the public dialogue. Like Cathy, I participated in that Climate Forum for Elected Officials workshop series that FCM organized, which was great because I got to meet different councillors and activists who were from across the country who were engaged in activities. And I was able to learn about initiatives that we could borrow from and steal from and plagiarize and try to incorporate in our municipality. So what I want to talk about from the political point of view is the importance of allies. So I'm just going to run through a couple of things that we've done within West Grey and outline how I believe they illustrate the role of allies. In 2019, West Grey declared a climate emergency. That was in part a response to a very large delegation that presented at a committee of the whole. The room was packed. We had a very impassioned speaker in Diane Jones, who made the plea for West Grey to adopt a climate emergency declaration. And the this delegation was very effective, and I think in part because they had some informal support from Councillor Beth Hamilton, who's on this call right now, I believe. And I think it's that sort of teamwork approach that is how you get things done in local government and local politics. Part of a result of that initiative was that we struck a climate advisory committee. It was called something else, Sustainability Committee. I think it's recently changed. It's changed its name a couple of times. But we had about 15 citizens who volunteered to come out and be involved in that committee. And it actually spawned off 2 other subcommittees on creating a climate action plan and waste reduction. So there was tremendous citizen desire to participate in the sort of local government structures. So that was very, very heartening. Of course, shortly after that, COVID hit, meetings were canceled. We had a very hard time reconvening, but we're just getting that sort of started up again now. And I'm very optimistic about that partnership. When we worked with some of our staff, and I'm going to come back to staff in a couple minutes, we were all sort of novices in the sort of climate crisis and the climate issues. I'm sort of recently educated, as I think Cathy indicated she was. But I've been really impressed with how quickly the staff has sort of gotten up to speed and taken on the challenges that we've all been having in a conversation in the council chambers and in the municipality. So our public works department right now is very enthusiastic about exploring wooden bridges to replace some of our aging wooden and steel and concrete bridges because of the smaller greenhouse gas footprint that they provide. So to see that sort of enthusiasm is heartening. Our recreation manager is spearheading initiatives to develop community gardens throughout all of the little towns within our municipality. He's applied for tree planting grants, including edible trees that would be planted around the community gardens. Again, sort of partnership. We're building a new police station, and we've had varying levels of engagement in the planning of that. We're in the fairly early stages, well, mid to early stages. And we've committed to incorporating as many green initiatives as we can into that project. It's going to cost more a little bit, but it seems important to the community that we take every opportunity that we can to leave the world a little better than we found it. This year, we committed funds in our budget to film plastic recycling and styrofoam recycling programs that I think some of the other speakers have talked about. And these programs, we didn't invent these. These programs were pioneered by either entrepreneurs or developed in neighboring communities. And we were able to sort of borrow those initiatives and the research and the years of ground laying that other climate groups in neighboring communities had already done. So that was really beneficial for us. Our own CAO, Laura Johnston, just recently made a recommendation to council that we join the FCM Partners for Climate Protection Program. So again, it's great to see staff bringing forward initiatives that it's not entirely a politician or a councillor-led dialogue. It's a team commitment. And this year we committed $50,000 in our budget to develop a climate action plan. So that's for politicians. I would almost think that our vocabulary is money. So if we believe in something, we'll put money into it. If we don't believe in it, we won't put money into it. And that's how you can tell what people believe in. So the fact that we are actually going to put actual dollars, and I consider 50,000 to be actual dollars, not just a token investment, is very heartening as well. I'll just say this is not totally germane, but we do have a small citizens group locally that I've been liaising with a little bit that's trying to undertake green burials within West Grey. And they're encountering a fair bit of pushback. There's a lot of tradition involved in the burial practices within our culture. And it's very interesting to me to see them at this stage in their conversations, because this might be a 10-year conversation that they're going to have, to have thinking change, to have opportunities, little opportunities emerge that you can sort of slip into. But it's great to see this group working, to laying the groundwork. I'm trying to support them. And hopefully there will be, some sort of benefit to their initiatives down the road. So the value of having citizen committees of council, like our sustainability or climate action committee, and independent groups like a lot of you are involved in, engaged with council is very, very important, because it keeps the issue at the forefront of the decision-making process. We have to be thinking about climate through all of our decision-making, not just the climate-related discussions. Practices and attitudes need to change, and as John said, that happens through familiarization, normalization, and ongoing conversation and exposure. Politics is slow, but if you are prepared, you can act when opportunities arise. So we need to be preparing all the time and then seizing opportunities when they come up. So just to sort of conclude, I wanted to say what politicians can do. And I've been there for 2 years, so I don't really know. I'm figuring this out. 2 years isn't a lot of time. Others have been doing this for decades. But this is my sort of rough estimation of what I can do as a politician. I can encourage, assist, and advise citizens and groups. I can request, as a member of council, through council's consensus, we can request staff reports to explore needs and opportunities. We can ask staff to explore grants for special projects, and we can commit funds from taxes at budget time in a competitive setting. So that's really important. If you want to be getting money from council for an initiative, you need to be thinking about doing that just prior to budget time, because that's when those decisions are going to be made. How should you influence politicians? Delegations are great. And as I said, we had a huge delegation early on in our tenure, and it was very effective. Individual meetings are also great. I love talking to people, whether it's on the phone or formerly face-to-face, hopefully again. I agree with Joyce that email is not the most effective way of persuading someone. Emails are a fairly crude persuasion tool. So I'd really encourage you to try and get FaceTime with the people who are making decisions. And you could ask, this is something that Councillor Hamilton and I heard in a meeting recently, ask the question, under what conditions would this work? So you're not asking for permission, you're not asking to make something happen, you're asking to make something happen that can then make something happen. Understanding that it's a process and that a lot of moving pieces have to align before big investments can be made and big decisions can be made and progress can be made. Finally, I'm just going to re-stress the importance of the role of staff. I'm very keen to hear Kim speaking next as CAO of Grey County, and within our municipality, we have Laura Johnston, our CAO, and these people do play distinct and important leadership roles within the community. So I would work on the politicians, but work on staff and senior staff at the same time when you're trying to persuade municipalities to get behind your initiatives. I'll mention two things that influenced me tremendously. One, when we were planning the police station and trying to make it a green building, I reached out to the director of buildings for the region of Waterloo. And they've built 15 buildings in 15 years that were all LEED certified, including 2 police stations. And they've now gone on to the higher net zero standard. So it was great that I was able to get a lot of information on how to develop a police station as greenly as possible. But it was also important to recognize I was dealing with a staff person. I was dealing with someone who's in charge of their building development department And he was completely impassioned about green buildings. And he gave me so much time because he wanted to see us succeed as well. Similarly, I had an experience with somebody who developed a green development policy at Halton Hills. This was a pioneering policy that was developed in, I believe, 2014, and you should Google it. And it puts green requirements on developers. So a developer coming in to build a new development has to, it's kind of like a leads system where there's a number of check marks and points that you get for various things that you incorporate into your development, but you have to achieve a certain level. And they've had complete buy-in from the building community. It's tremendously successful. And again, completely developed by an imaginative and impassioned staff. So it's just re-stressing the role of staff. What's next? I'd love to see us developing a green development standards within West Grey, possibly even at the level of the county. I will talk further to Kim about that maybe. We have to be upgrading our own infrastructure to make it more sustainable and GHG considerate. We are doing a little bit. We're planning to get an electric ice resurfacer to replace our aging Zamboni, but we need to be doing much, much more than that in terms of upgrading our infrastructure. And I like Joyce's comment about making counting greenhouse gases part of our process. It should just be part of the budgeting process. We're counting our dollars. We should also be counting our greenhouse gases. I'm new to council. Most of the other members of the council are new as well. And I think that our council is quite an open-minded council. And so my perspective is that politicians are an open-minded group of people and they want to solve problems. We have this very intricate machine that we live in, full of rules and policies and things that cause us to move slower than some people would like. But I think that we want to be part of a team with the citizens. So that's my pitch for alliance building and working in partnership. Thank you.
Okay, Geoffrey, that was a lot of thanks again. So, okay, now we move to Kim Wingrove, who is probably waiting. Kim Wingrove has been the Chief Administrative Officer of Grey County since 2015 and lives in the municipality of Meaford. Her 30-year career in public service has included CEO positions for the municipality of Guelph, Eramosa, and town of Collingwood, as well as Director of Regional Economic Development and Director of Rural Program Delivery with the province of Ontario. So Kim is a real politician, eh? Kim is passionate about the future of public service, environmental protection, dogs and grandchildren, not necessarily in that order. Okay, maybe we hear something about dogs as well. Okay, Kim, it's your turn.
I wanted to start off tonight by acknowledging that all of us at Grey County recognize that these are early days in our efforts around addressing all the aspects of climate change. We all know that there's so much that we can do. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities estimates that 50% of greenhouse gas emissions are under the direct influence or control of the municipal level of government. I want to give you some good positive takeaways out of my remarks tonight. And one of the first ones is that the Grey County Council has been more than supportive and committed to our efforts. Some good work has been done here. We've made some progress and there's a lot more to come. COVID has not been our friend. And I'm sorry for that. It has slowed us down on a number of fronts, but as I say, we are committed to moving forward. For many years, the county's been supporting initiatives that could be considered as supporting the environment. Things like developing active transportation policies, starting a transit system, building infrastructure that supports cycling, like paved shoulders, and creating our network of trails. We're encouraging compact forms of development that are walkable and accessible to amenities like parks and green space. I think one of our biggest assets that not everyone is familiar with is the 8,500 acres of forest that Grey County owns. We have a Forest and Trails Master Plan. We manage the forest in partnership with our conservation authorities, and we maintain a forest sustainability certification for our management practices. One of the key guiding documents of any municipality is their official plan. It has to be approved by both the council of that municipality as well as by the province. And Grey County's most recent OP, approved in June of 2019, contains goals, objectives, and policies to manage and direct physical land use change and monitor its effects on the cultural, social, economic, natural environment within the community. That plan was based on extensive consultation with the public and our 9-member municipalities, and it sets out key areas of opportunity, including climate change. And under that specific topic, the plan says climate change is considered by many to be the world's biggest challenge in the coming century. We must take action to adapt to and mitigate the effects of a changing climate. This will include making greater efforts to protect and to enhance the resiliency of our natural, built, and social environments. The County of Grey will work towards creating a climate change action plan that will coordinate the county's efforts to embrace and facilitate resilient, sustainable development to mitigate the effects of climate change within our communities. So that official plan work, I believe, gives us a solid foundation from which to begin. So with the approval of the plan back in 2019, we struck a climate change working group of staff and stakeholders and a Grey County Climate Task Force of elected officials and staff. We are also members of that FCM Partners for Climate Protection that lays out the steps for building a plan. We retained ICLEI Canada as our consultants, and they've been working with everyone to create a draft climate change action plan. That plan assesses our energy use today and focuses on climate change mitigation efforts to reduce emissions created by both the corporation of the County of Grey, like our services, our fleet, our buildings, and the community, our residents, businesses, institutions, visitors, etc. ICLEI has established baseline greenhouse gas emissions and recommended reduction targets. We have a path forward for how those could be achieved by establishing a clear vision and goals, and then defining strategies and an effective implementation approach to ensure the plan can be put into action. So where we are right now with all of this is we're just putting the finishing touches on the draft plan. We just received council support to hire our very first climate change coordinator, whose role will be to undertake public consultation on the draft, work with our member municipalities around their contribution to the plan's objectives, and then building out the final version of the plan for council approval and leading the implementation. Okay, we're already 30, I'll go here. The plan has 7 strategies: energy conservation in buildings, transition to low carbon transportation modes, waste diversion and promoting a circular economy, greenhouse gas reduction in the ag sector, land use planning, including reforestation, biodiversity and habitat protection, supporting renewable energy, and protection of waterways and shorelines. Now, all of these have a contribution, a defined contribution to those greenhouse gas targets that we are looking to. So that's where we are, where we stand today. So that draft plan will be released to the public. There will be a comprehensive consultation effort to get people's comments to make sure that everyone is seeing themselves in this document and is supportive of it as what will guide us into the future. I so agree with the points that Odette and John made, both around collective impact and, you know, people do struggle with how they're, as one person or one family, can make a difference. And I think one of our shortcomings is that people don't have information to tie their actions to direct outcomes. And there are places around the world that are maybe ahead of us, and we should look to them Even something as simple as the energy performance certificates that the UK has for housing. When you go buy a house, it has a reading associated with it. If you're, and I think that creates the case for people to consider what actions they should be doing in investing in their properties if they can, or landlords helping people that are struggling with housing situations. That kind of information is helpful, and I think we need to look for opportunities to bring that into everybody's understanding. I also think that there's a place for celebrating the great activities that happen, and I think that goes towards normalizing things, the reuse of things, the circular economy, the efforts that individuals, students in school, families are making on things like cleaning our roadsides. We have hundreds of volunteers every year that walk the roadsides in Grey County and pick up garbage so that it can be either disposed of or recycled. And I think we need to make more of those efforts so that everyone is aware of those things and sees those kind of activities being celebrated. Finally, and I'm a policy person from a long time ago, and good policy means understanding what will incent the behavior that you want to see, and what the barriers or challenges are to people undertaking that behavior. We need to understand why people feel that they can't choose the environmentally beneficial action, and then work together to make that to be the easier choice.
I think it's really great that Grey County is working on the climate action plan. That is fantastic, and it sounds like it will be a very comprehensive one. And again, there's a lot of support from the community. So the question is, how does it impact on the climate action plans of the lower tier communities or municipalities? And this might be a question that actually the other presenters might want to talk about too.
My initial comment would be that when ICLEI established those greenhouse gas emission when they established the baseline and then looked to targets and reduction, the only way that we're going to achieve those reductions is by the efforts of everyone here, right? These aren't great counties, except for the things that we directly own, our own assets, but the broader community emissions targets that are being set will require the efforts of everyone in the county. And so that's why we want to work with each of our member municipalities to make sure that when we talk about implementing this plan and the initiatives that will support those reductions, they're achievable, they're real for people, that we understand what changes, what investments, what is going to have to happen to make that real, because there's far too much cynicism in the world as it is. I don't think that anybody wants a plan that we don't feel strongly that we're committed to, or that we can actually achieve the targets that we're setting. So there's this tremendous amount of consultation and work that needs to happen right now to enable this plan, and it's very early days yet.
Well, thanks very much, and I'm sure that this resonates with Geoffrey and Cathy as city councillors or municipal councillors, right? You talked about that too.
There are so many questions for Kim and for Jeff, and a couple of people have their hand up. So I apologize to those who have the hand up. For the sake of time, we have to go and get the backlog of questions. But there's so much that Kim has brought up too. So without further ado, we'll just we'll ask Barry's question to the panel. So if you're in the panel, please unmute, and if you're not on the panel, please stay muted. This is sort of an important one. How can the need for jobs and economic development be positively connected to climate action. Who wants to make a comment on their relationship and their experience within their own organization or as an activist?
Okay, I'll just jump in. The really obvious, I get asked this question all the time by the students in Georgian College, and the really obvious answer is we need to completely rebuild our energy production and distribution system for starters. And it's going to be based on renewables. It's going to be new transmission systems using ultra high efficiency DC transmissions. And any statistic you look at is already in both Canada and the States, the number of jobs in the renewable sector industry is multiples the number of jobs in the fossil fuel industry. So that's going to be the very first as we build back better, as we move to not just renewable energy, but the way we use that energy, the way we distribute it. The second thing is going to be innovation. We're going to unleash a whole wave of innovation that's going to require young, bright minds to come up with solutions to problems we might have stated right now, problems we're not even sure of. And this innovation wave is going to be huge, and it's going to require people to come up with solutions. And so those are usually the first two places I start with the students at the college.
Great. So the other pressing question is to Kim. Kim, when will we see the climate action plan for Grey County be released?
My crystal ball is in the shop. Let me tell you, it's I make plans, God laughs. I would expect before the end of May. It's just a matter of timing and making sure that we're there. But the draft is complete, so it needs to get on a committee agenda, and then it needs to get out to the world. So we're there.
Okay, thank you. There's one question as well to Kim. It has to do more specifically with solutions. So the question is from Suzanne, talking about reduction of greenhouse gases and building energy use reductions. Well, might the larger required wall size of net zero passive house buildings not be penalized by associated higher building permit fees? Example, by check incentive of passive houses?
I guess there's always the question of the carrot and the stick. And the provincial building code is a complicated thing. One of the things that we've committed to here is bringing together our building officials and having a conversation with them, with the development community, to see what our opportunities are to incent the kind of behavior that we want to see, rather than trying to penalize it. So I think that would be my first take at the approach there, is we want people to see a benefit to it. And I might be Pollyanna, but I do really believe in the innate goodness of people who really want to do the right thing if we allow them to. And the more that we can communicate to people about the impact of their choices and make that front and center, I think, you'll start to see people looking at things differently. They just don't have all of that information available to them right now.
Thank you for answering that. Joachim, you know what, Joachim, a lot of the questions to Jeff had been answered by Jeff. So thank you, Jeff, for being active in the chat. Joachim, over to you, Joachim.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, it's great that this parallel conversation went on chat, and thanks for being so prolific in doing that. So I think we covered a lot of ground. It was really exciting having everybody here tonight, and thanks for being here. There's a lot of talk about engaging people, but not engaging just citizens, but also staff and council. And there are some really kind of encouraging ideas and stories that work and that are forward-looking. So how to connect? There was a lot about connection, education, that we need to talk about climate change, climate action, and that's why we are here today. and that we need to talk basically to everybody. Everybody needs to hear about it. Everybody, and we can start anywhere. And that we need allies. That it's teamwork. It can't be done just by individual people, individual citizens. So thanks again, everybody, for being here. I think there are a lot of ideas that will lead to further discussions like that. That we will continue, and we will sort out some of the questions that came up today that we can use for another gathering like this. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks to presenters. It was really great, very insightful, very engaged and engaging, and that's exactly what we need, what we're hoping for. So, and thanks for staying overtime. So, but we're all stuck anyway in our homes right now. So, so thanks again, and some of you I haven't met before. It was great to see you here, and we'll see each other again. And thanks for the great work you do wherever you do it. So good night, and see you again soon.